And now, looking to the future, and indeed what's happening right now, we have Director of Security Concepts at Thales, Davies, on autonomous connected vehicles and cybersecurity. With over 30 years' experience, Peter is a security expert, an honorary fellow at Imperial College's Institute for Security Science and Technology. He specializes in countering cyber attacks, supply chain infiltration, and cyber physical attacks. His colleague Gareth Davies will also be available. He's their head of research at Thales Cyber Digital Solutions, and he will be available as well once part of that presentation.
Thank you very much, and once again, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to put my glasses on because I can't see my own slides anymore. Also, I got my 40-year award this year, so this week, so I'm doing well. So what I'll try and do, and I should emphasise, this work is based on stuff that we've been doing over a long period of time. So in my own case, we started looking at autonomous and connected vehicles back about a decade ago, when they weren't so common. But nowadays, the amount that we get is advice we need in relation to that has escalated hugely. My colleague Gareth, who will stand up for you for a moment, so you can collar him over lunch. I don't have to waste time with him now. Specialises, he's a forensic expert. He gives a lot of expert for the Home Office, for the police, in relation to cyber attacks and cyber incidents of that sort. And the fact we're both busy and don't get a chance to retire is down to how important some of these things have become. And I will emphasise that drawing this stuff together, we've done on the basis of some encouragement from MIBI UK, for which we're truly grateful. So I'll try and put you through some of these things. So I'll give you an overview of the problem and how that actually relates. And what I'd like you to do is think about here, the vehicles becoming a part of the problem from an insurance point of view here. We've talked about things like the individuals, how we can look at things in relation to that, how these things are put together, how they're updated, and the fact that people are now motivated to make them do the wrong things is actually starting to become part of the problem. In many areas of insurance, I know you're able to say, it's not mine, but unfortunately, under things like the Road Traffic Acts, either the insurance companies themselves or the motor insurance bureaus end up carrying the can in relation to that. And that doubles down when we talk about terrorism or motivated actors. So I'll give an outline of the threat actors, an overview of some of the risk factors which I think you should be thinking about, and give you some conclusions and recommendations in relation to that, if that's all right, he says. So giving you a bit on the problem context that goes with this, and talking about the legacy and how things have changed over the last decade. So a decade ago when I went for a vehicle, apart from the fact you've changed the terminology. When I went for a vehicle, it was basically an electromechanical thing. Its speedometer was electromechanical. It was all these sorts of things. And one of the things I'd like to encourage you to think about in relation to that is the failure mode of electromechanical systems is one at a time. I was always able to saw through people's brake pipes. It caused a crash, but I had to do that one at a time. I could go up and steal people's cars, or I could crash into other people, but I did that one at a time. As we've moved on, the problem context now, you've got GPS, so many things here. You'll find that actually you're looking at that it's got positioning, it's got traffic lights that we're now looking at. So if you look on your dashboard, it's often telling you what the speed limit is around here and all those sorts of things. I've got ABS that's actually braking. I've got things that are telling me that up ahead, we're about to get to somebody's pulling out in front of me and things. And all of these are actually extremely important. In fact, I don't know how you're going to achieve your 2030 and 2050 agendas without these things being important. So I'm not suggesting we don't want these. However, I am suggesting that these are actually problematic, and they have brought in a whole new vector of attack into these things. And not just attack, it's a question of whether we actually know how to engineer these sorts of systems. And that, I think, is a really important element that you need to be looking at when you're looking at these things. So what does it look like nowadays? It kind of looks like this. Cars are connected to cars. Cars are connected to traffic lights. Cars are connected to satellites in space. So if you think about this, generally speaking, if you look at responsibility, and these are always the important things, who's responsible for these things, what are you actually doing around this kind of stuff, then I don't know how I can be responsible for the satellites. I don't know how I can be responsible for the other vehicles. If I improve my engineering processes, if I need to do the right sorts of things, it isn't something that I can actually affect other parts of this sort of system. So the connected vehicle complex is actually already upon us. It will get more complicated over the coming decades, but it is already upon us. And that's a really important aspect, because when you start looking at and beyond that, we've now also put in place regulations. So we put in things like the UNEC 155s and 156s that says that you don't release vehicles without having a cyber management plan. So we've actually put in costs, we put all sorts of things in associated with that that are actually vectors of attack. So is it possible to maintain the sorts of things that you need to against those sorts of things? So I will go and talk forever about what cyber attacks look like, but the fundamental thing that I want you to think about and take away from this, when you go home and talk to your children tonight, talk about the difference between complicated and complex. It's a really important concept. Complicated are things where next year I buy a more powerful computer and it does things twice as fast and I can fix it. My database, I can put a few more things in it and I'm able to fix it. Complex is a different thing. Complex is a mathematical concept. Yeah, and what you have is the two defining characteristics of complex systems are chaos and emergence. And we can show, and we have shown for MIBI, that essentially when you're doing cyber attacks, every cyber attack leverages off those two aspects of chaos and emergence in systems. So emergence means things that where you look at the individual properties, you actually can't see the outcome of the overall system from those. And chaos is looking at sensitivity. So if I change one bit here, then I have a huge change in the system. And when you look at the connectivity that you had in that picture that I put on my previous slide, that is what you've got. You've got a single bit error. And into this, we're filtering things obviously like AI, which isn't some new branch of science. It's a new way of doing mathematics and things of this nature. But you've got essentially theorems that we've worked out that our attackers understand, whereby single bit errors give you unforeseen consequences. Anything beyond about 10 lines of code. And I've looked in the code, it's about 2.5 million lines of code. An ABS system, for instance, has in the order of 23 sensors being put together. The systems that you're seeing for looking ahead and doing collision avoidance feed back into the ABS system. This is an incredibly complex system trying to be executed at safety critical. And you guys are ensuring it. And that's good because you've got a fund of 230 million. But the problem is, and one of the really serious ways you need to think about this as you go along now, is that the mode of failure of a digital system or a digital system that's controlling a system that is physical is global first. It cost the insurance industry around $3.6 billion for WannaCry. I don't know what it's going to cost for the CrowdStrike stuff that we've just had, CrowdStrike stuff that's just gone past. I'm sure it'd be well in excess of those. And the reaction of the industry and regulators, certainly in the UK, has been to say, you've got to make it clear whether you're covering cyber or not. And most people have reacted by going, we're not covering it. But you guys don't get that luxury. The Road Traffic Act and things of that nature make it clear that you do have to cover it. So you have to understand the complexity of the problem and the scale of the problem, not be in a position to actually contract out of that responsibility. And that, I believe, will become more complex for you as you go forward and you see autonomous vehicles. When is a vehicle autonomous? I'm sure some of you have an answer. Certainly legislators think they have answers in relation to that. Because how can an individual be responsible for a vehicle? Who are you insuring? Are you insuring the individual or the vehicle? Yeah, that bit as you switch backwards or forwards, it's going to be part of what you guys are going to have to test in court. And as a cyber attacker, I'm going to know that you are struggling with that problem. So looking at some of the things we have there, since the 2000s, we've essentially had, this has become a more and more complex problem. And we haven't noticed it. Now you could say, this is the problem of automotive suppliers. They should be doing a better job at doing all of these things. But the conclusion actually should be, there is no proper engineering process. They're expected to do top-down things in relation to this, but they're buying things from their supply chains. And you should look at legislation. So in legislation, you get things like the European Cyber Act, which came in, I think, in March of this year. That means that product suppliers will do updates every time they find a cyber problem. Okay, so that's 12 times a year I give you updates. It takes 3 years to recertify the vehicle for safety. That's a disjoint. Every cyber attacker in the world knows that's a disjoint. They know you can't do that. Now, of course, part of what you're actually saying in relation to that may be that we actually only have a few attackers worldwide who can do this. So I'd like to give you a story in relation to this. And in fact, some of you may have seen, and if not, then I'm sure Nick would be very happy to invite you to come along and see. We developed a simulator for actually doing cruise controls. Everybody has cruise control on their car. Most people have cruise control. You know the way that sort of you lock in the speedometer or the throttle. You've got the brake and things of that nature going into it. We got that so that we could demonstrate the interplay between an expert quality developer and a cyber attacker that actually knew nothing about cyber attacks. She came from marine biology, but she understood complexity and emergence because she came from that. She understood population, she understood those things. To put this into context, she was generating a cyber attack every 10 minutes, and the expert developer was taking in the order of 2 weeks to get a fix. That is unsustainable. And what were those sorts of problems? Well, the sorts of problems that we demonstrate on this stuff, just by using something you can buy off Amazon, is that you're able to jam up a cruise control, jam up the braking system to the extent, and jam up the accelerator to the extent that the only way to stop it and correct it is to physically disconnect the battery. So if you see people driving down the dual carriageway trying to crawl into the back so they can disconnect the battery, it's because they've gone through one of those. And if that was one at a time, that would be a serious thing. But I've just told you, these things happen across entire populations. There are single points of failures. And that was the learning that you got from things from like WannaCry. That's the learning that you get out of CrowdStrike. That's the learning that you get out of the sort of stuff that you've just seen with the Israelis doing it around pages and things. Single points of failure, single components in the automotive infrastructure. There are only 2 components worldwide that control batteries. Think about that. And one of them's a copy of the other one. So what that means is it's nice that we don't have these problems, and sincerely, I really do believe we are going to have to find a way to do these things in order to get the kind of agenda that society wants, to get the 2030 and the 2050 objectives in terms of reducing accidents and deaths on the road. But we had better start to understand what it will mean in terms of how are we going to be able to ensure those sorts of things. Because the only reason we have the kind of road traffic capability, the kind of roads that we have at the moment, is because we have found a way to make those people who are blameless. It's not my fault there was an accident. On this slide here, you can see another set of things that go in relation to it. You'll see the complex picture over on the right of it, or left, wherever you're looking from. And I think the thing that I'd like to emphasize here, there are several different types of threat actors. There are people who are experts. We do nowadays have an escalating terrorist threat. And it's worth remembering that WannaCry wasn't an attack against the health service. It wasn't an attack against all the people that suffered. It was an attack against the Estonian power grid. It's just that nobody knows how to stop these things once they start. And cars and vehicles use the same components. You need to think about this. It's not that there's a whole new world of technology in vehicles that you're insuring and it's not covered by the stuff that's in my mobile phone. It's the same stuff. Yeah, and that I think is a really important consideration. So whilst you've got people who are motivated to do things, they're not necessarily motivated to understand how to stop it at the limits of what they want to do. In fact, possibly terrorists are the least of my problems because they normally do know how to stop it. But actually, one of the things that the attacker we showed, the lady from the marine biology, her job wasn't actually to do cyber attacks. Her job was to show that she could educate 11-year-olds in how to do this. One of the observations that we made when we talk about GPS, we trained an entire generation of children. Pokemon Go is the bane of my life. With the tools that they needed to pretend that they were somewhere else in the world. Or to put it another way, we trained an entire generation of children to not understand the ethics, but to actually be able to do GPS spoofing. This is not stuff that is only available to people like me, and more so to Gareth. This is stuff that is available to your children, which is why we chose the cruise control, so that they could come out of school and sit in the back of the car and go, "What did you do at school today, dear?" And they would say, "We learned how to attack the cruise control." Because getting people to try and start to understand that sort of stuff was an important part of getting this. So it's not, I know when you talk about these things, often people talk about it as privacy, but that isn't what it's about. This is about making sure you can get systems that do what you want, when you want them, and to do that through life. That's an important consideration when you're looking at cyber. This is one of our complex things that we put out here. So the bottom one is always the one that I concentrate on there. You guys, I know, are looking at risk and you're doing actuarial tables for risk. But getting to that is a really complex activity in its own right. And I would argue that you haven't yet started to take on board some of the things that you've been seeing out there in the world that come from other industries, but which are going to affect you. And you don't have the way to evade them that other industries have had. So that, I think, will be an issue for you. The other thing that we're discovering in terms of legislation, the need so under consumer legislation, the need for vehicle manufacturers to maintain vehicles for at least 8 years. We anticipate 250,000 cyber attacks that are relevant in that time. Just think about how much that will be costing and whether people will be able to be effective in relation to that. And to try and put this into context, this is what we've been looking at. I talked about complexity and the growing system complexity, meaning that you've got increased vulnerabilities. This is kind of what it looks like. It's very complex. But actually, this is what it looks like. You've got systems of systems with all sorts of things going together. It is not surprising that people are not in a position to tell you that they have actually managed to get rid of this stuff. And the consequences previously were, I've made a mistake, and in this instance, this goes wrong. And I will try and put this into context. He says, I think I have included the numbers and things in relation to this. The one at the bottom there is a graph, because I know you guys like graphs because I've been looking at them all morning. Yeah. This is an exponential graph that goes in relation to this. The number one reason for product recalls, over the measured in the US and the UK since 2016, has been product complexity. The very thing your cyber attacker is going for, rising at a rate of 3% per annum. And when I was at primary school, I was taught to draw curves that rise at 3% per annum. At some point, they become exponential, or they are exponential. So at some point, you start to discuss there isn't enough money in the world, there aren't enough experts. So that'll be the problem that you're starting to deal with. So that discussion about what does that look like and how will you address those sorts of things. You talked about a once every 20-year event. But these things are showing you're going to get 250,000 attacks occurring just if you look at the cyber incident rate. That's going to be unaffordable within the 8-year period of time. So that doesn't mean I'm saying this is doom and despondency unless you don't deal with it. You know, so the first thing you need in order to be able to deal with things is to understand them and to start to talk about them. So I'm very grateful you give me this opportunity to stand here and talk to you, because I believe you're going to need to have some sort of a really good dialogue about this so that you can put yourself in a position to create a resilient industry. Yeah. Otherwise, you better go back to people and tell them not to have these objectives, to put in these complex systems and things of this nature. And we can all go back to Morris Minors and things, but that doesn't really seem to be a feasible thing to do. And you know, I'd obviously call that a Canute thing. Other elements I'd like to note in relation to that is, if you look at the stats coming out of this, it goes across every type of vertical system that you're doing. You know, it's pretty much equal. It doesn't matter whether it's in an entertainment system or a braking system, you're getting the same sorts of problems. So what that's telling you is we don't know how to do this, because people are working really hard on braking systems, much less so on entertainment systems. If you're getting the same outcome, we don't know how to do this. And your cyber attackers know that. I only have to win once. And that's the issue you get in relation to these things. The other thing I would really, really like to get people to consider, every time you talk about cyber, people tend to talk about it as though it's a software thing. So this is designed to talk about some of the hardware vulnerabilities that you're seeing there. Hardware vulnerabilities are just as plentiful as software ones. So some of you may have heard of things like Spectrum Meltdown a few years ago. Yeah, that was an attack. But we can give examples that are coming up, not quite as often as software ones, but certainly at a rate of knots in relation. But it's really, really interesting as an example, because the fix for that took 10 days. But if you're doing a safety critical system and it takes you 3 years to reissue it because you don't know what's not running in the cycles you now don't have, it cut down the number of cycles available in the processor by 25%, thereabouts. So that means that you have this disjoint between the speed at which people can produce things at the quality that you're asking for and the speed that people are being told to turn out these fixes. So the cyber legislation, the regulations are actually becoming part of the attack vector. And we're starting to see cyber attackers using the need to keep updating things, the need to keep pushing things in that way, as a way of actually giving problems to you guys. Normally I do a welcome to my world at this point. Or something like along those lines. So this one here is actually trying to talk about this regulation and the engineering process. I realise none of you are necessarily engineers. I've probably done you a disservice there. You're probably all engineers. But if you were engineers, what you'd be listening to was people telling you about V models and things of that nature. You'd have been told when you went to school that you needed to learn about how you design, and you do top-down designs on all of these things. The important thing is that's actually not what we do, or that's not what you have the time to do. Boeing will tell you why they can't commit. You know, they can't get a plane back in the air for 18 months. If I said I can't get a car back on the road for 18 months, that would not matter if it was one car. But if I said every Ford was going to be off the road for the next 18 months, and somebody has to ensure that, that's becoming a problem. I suspect at that stage you'd be looking at a lot of uninsured drivers because they'd have no choice but to drive. Yeah, and certainly in the UK, there's a discussion about when we do MOTs, must we insist that we have the latest baseline of software in relation to this? I've obviously foreseen that we're going to create huge car parks for people who take it in for an MOT and can't take it away again. Yeah, because These issues need to be discussed and gone through. But also, we compose systems. We don't do top-down design. And when you compose things, that's the chaos, that's the emergence, that's these things coming into play. We fundamentally don't have an engineering process for this. And we definitely don't have one for something that includes AI as part of that. So whilst I acknowledge this is definitely what you need, what you're actually looking at a thing. And I will foresee that the CrowdStrike costs will dwarf what it cost us, when we were going through the costs for WannaCry. And I will foresee that within the next decade, the cost of an attack on the automotive industry will dwarf anything you see on CrowdStrike, because it will take a single point. And that's assuming we don't actually go to war or find anybody that actually decides that they're actually deliberately going to try and do this stuff to you. So I apologise for something that sounds a bit doom and despondency, but that's not what it is. Well, okay, that is what it is. That isn't what I mean by this. What I seriously mean by this, and the reason I got involved in this a decade ago, was because if we don't pay attention to this as a really big thing and a really important aspect, then it will hit us and we will not like the outcomes. If we start to manage it now and think about what that might mean and start to think about making sure we understand what that might mean for our actuarial models, what that might mean for our ability, what we might need to have in the way of things, what arguments you should stop people making, what advice you should give to government, and those sorts of things, then we're in a much better position to be able to create a resilient industry, which is what you want to do, and to maintain all of the good things that you've been able to do up until now. And since I'm on the conclusion slide, I never read through my conclusions. I take the view you should be able to read. But I will be happy to do so if you wish to do so, but it's really only saying the things I have said up until now, I hope. And I say thank you for in that, and I'm conscious that I overran slightly, and I apologise.